Washington Post reporting this evening that the President of the United States has revealed top secret classified information to Russia. According to the Post, Trump shared the classified information with the Russian ambassador and the Russian foreign minister at the White House last week. This information involved ISIS. The report states it jeopardized a critical source of intelligence. And we are awaiting a briefing from the National Security Advisor at those cameras momentarily. The White House now in full denial mode. The Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategy, Dina Powell, saying tonight the story is false. The president only discussed the common threats that both countries faced. Of course, the Russian ambassador is believed by U.S. intelligence to be a top Russian spy and spy recruiter. Sarah Murray begins our coverage out front at the White House as we await H.R. McMaster approaching those cameras and speaking to the press. The minute that happens, we'll bring you there live. Sarah, I know you're just feet away. What are you learning?
Well, Aaron, we are looking for a fuller explanation from the president's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, on exactly what happened but in this meeting between President Trump and Russia's foreign minister, as well as Russia's ambassador. That's where the Washington Post is reporting that the president apparently shared classified information. Now, the White House has been scrambling for the last, I would say, hour or so to figure out how they're going to respond to this. They responded by putting a trio of statements out from some of their officials, and they don't all say the same thing, Aaron. As you pointed out, there is a statement from Dina Powell, a deputy national security advisor, that flat out says this story is false. But it's worth noting that the White House also put out statements from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, as well as National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster already. Those statements don't go that far. They do not say the story is flat out false. Let me read you what H.R. McMaster said in his statement. The president and the foreign minister reviewed common threats from terrorist organizations to include threats to aviation. At no time were any intelligence sources or methods discussed, and no military operations were disclosed that were not already known publicly. So not a flat-out denial that the story is false. And Aaron, just one more point of fact-checking here. The Washington Post report, they broke this story about what the president said to these Russian officials, does not say that he discussed sources and methods, but it does say that he disclosed classified information, clearly the kind of classified information that was very alarming when U.S. officials found out about it. And obviously we're waiting to get more details on this sort of discrepancy we're seeing in these statements from H.R. McMaster when he begins speaking.
All right, Sarah, thank you very much. And the Washington Post reporter who broke the story going to be with me in just a moment because there are some crucial details here in this story. I want to go to the Pentagon now, though, for the response. Barbara Starr is there. And Barbara, do we at this time know what it is that the president revealed?
Well, according to the Washington Post, and I'll leave it to the reporter you have to explain it further, some of this did have to do, in fact, with intelligence that perhaps led to the ban on laptops on board passenger cabins in airplanes. So it's quite interesting that that statement referenced aviation. You could talk about that with the Russians, certainly. Nobody wants to see Russian passenger liners crash due to some intelligence threat they may not be aware of. But the Post article clearly suggesting that the president shared some of the most sensitive intelligence information about this, and that information came from another country. And that is the key problem. When you get intelligence from another country, you can't share it with somebody else. It's very sensitive. It's very confidential. There's no expectation that you're going to share it with another country. Countries want to know that they can tell the U.S. things, that they can tell the president, the CIA, and that information will be kept confidential, because if it is shared, it puts their own people, this other country that we don't know who it is, it potentially puts their people, their intelligence gathering systems, all of that at risk on the ground in very dangerous places around the world. It jeopardizes their safety, their ability to operate, and what happens is they don't want to share with the United States anymore. So there's going to be a real question here about whether some confidence has been shaken in intelligence services around the world.
All right, Barbara, thank you very much. And I want to get to the reporter who broke the story, Greg Miller, national security correspondent for the Washington Post. My whole panel is with me. I want to introduce all of you. Then we're going to start with Greg. Bob Baer is here, former CIA, Juliette Kayyem, former Homeland Security, Mark Preston, political analyst, Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law professor emeritus, and Jim Sciutto, our chief national security correspondent. So, Greg, let me start with you so you could explain. And I know I want to make sure people understand. You're going to share as much as you can, but not enough to put lives at risk if that is what you're trying to do, right? You're not going to say the city from where this intelligence operative was able to penetrate top levels of ISIS, for example, to try to protect lives. But tell me how specific, how top secret, what was this information?
So as your other reporter summarized, this was really sensitive information about an ongoing and unfolding Islamic State terror plot that has caused a great deal of concern among counterterrorism officials. And in a conversation with the Russian foreign minister and ambassador, Trump is going into details of what the United States knows about this unfolding plot, how the Islamic State is pursuing it, trying to put it together, trying to pull it off, and at the same time talking about some of the measures the United States is taking to try to deal with it. And this is problematic mainly because this is information the United States has, mainly, if not exclusively, because of a foreign partner providing it that has some access to the Islamic State. And so this wasn't intel that the United States was authorized to share, and especially not authorized to share with Russia.
And I want to read to you, Greg, because this goes to the heart of what you're reporting. Two statements from the White House tonight, one of which came from the Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, via the White House, say this. During President Trump's meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov, a broad range of subjects were discussed, among which were common efforts and threats regarding counterterrorism. During that exchange, the nature of specific threats were discussed. Okay, so they admit it. I'm sorry, but they did not discuss sources, methods, or military operations. All right, so let me just ask you specifically, Greg, because in your report, you are saying that while those sources and methods may not have been specifically discussed, by the information the president shared, they would be easily ascertainable, right?
In fact, our story says clearly that the president did not name this partner, the source of this intelligence, did not talk about the particular collection capability that was responsible for this intelligence, but was providing details that came because of this intelligence stream. And the worry among a lot of security officials that we talked to was that Russia, which has very capable intelligence services of its own, could try to reverse engineer this, could try to figure out what is this source the United States has, who is this ally that the United States is depending on, where does this stuff come from. Trump's reference to a specific city may have made that even easier. So that's what the concern is about.
And Greg, you continue. There's one sentence in your story. You write, Moscow would be keenly interested in identifying that source and possibly disrupting it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, so the relationship with Russia and Syria is so problematic, right? I mean, on the one hand, the United States and Russia both regard the Islamic State as a threat and want to deal with that threat and probably collaborate or cooperate to some degree in sharing information about that might protect Russians or might protect Americans from attack.
Greg, I interrupt just to listen to the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster. Everyone, here he is.
There's nothing that the president takes more seriously than the security of the American people. The story that came out tonight, as reported, is false. The president and the foreign minister reviewed a range of common threats to our two countries, including threats to civil aviation. At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed. And the president did not disclose any military operations that were not already publicly known. Two other senior officials who were present, including the Secretary of State, remember the meeting the same way and have said so. Their on-the-record accounts should outweigh those of anonymous sources. And I was in the room. It didn't happen. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Greg, let me just go to you first, okay, because I want to give you a chance. I want to make it clear here. He's saying your story is false and no sources and methods were disclosed, but I want to be loud and clear here. Your story does not say sources and methods were disclosed. It says a specific plot was discussed from which one would be able to figure out sources and methods. Am I correct?
I think that's right, and I think that the White House is playing word games here to that effect to try to blunt the impact of this story. Nor do any of these White House officials who are denouncing this story, nor have any of them offered any explanation why, if this was also above board and not problematic in any way, why did the National Security Council, coming out of this meeting, feel it was necessary to contact the CIA director and the director of the National Security Agency to give them a heads up on what Trump had just told the Russians?
Right. So the bottom line is you stand by this story on every word of it. He says it's false. You say no.
Absolutely.
All right, please stay with me. All of you stay with me. I just want to go to our justice correspondent, Evan Perez. Evan, Greg couldn't be clearer.
Well, yeah, Aaron, and I got to tell you, the words that that H.R. McMaster just spoke really does not really contradict Greg's story in the Washington Post report. And look, we know from experience, because we reported back on March 31st about the intelligence that was behind the laptop ban, and we spent a couple of days doing conference calls with the U.S. Intelligence agencies, and they were specifically concerned about the aspects that Greg was pointing out in this story, the things that the president allegedly told the Russian officials in the Oval Office there during that meeting are exactly the things that we were asked to keep out of the story, because we were told that if we reported those things, it would tell the enemy about the sources of methods, the way in which the U.S. had gathered this information, and its allies had gathered this information. So really, what we're talking about is you don't necessarily need to say, you know, a
this
specific.
Is how we got it. Yeah.
This is how we got it. But just the use of certain words and certain aspects, details of the story, we were told that we should hold back, and we did, because we felt that there was no interest for us to help the enemy and help terrorist organizations, you know, get through the security system here in the United States or around the world. So we held back a lot of those details, and now apparently, according to Greg's reporting, it appears the president just kind of let that out in his meeting with the Russian officials.
So Greg, let me just ask you, in terms of the detail, obviously you said it was a looming threat that he was giving details about, and just could you give me a little bit more information? He was walking through all sorts of scenarios related to this laptop bomb. I mean, what was it that he was sharing?
Yeah, I want to be clear here. So sources that we talked to were really worried about, they didn't want to compound the problem here, so they were withholding details from us, and then we are withholding even further details from our stories at the request of officials that we talked to all day today.
Right, such as, I'm just to interrupt, just such as you're withholding the name of the city so that ISIS wouldn't theoretically be able to know, well, it's someone had infiltrated their top levels in a specific city.
Correct.
That's just one thing. Anyway, go ahead.
Correct. And so, I mean, so we're withholding some of that information, but but we know more about what Trump talked about in this session, and the way it was described to us was he was laying out sort of details about the capability here, how the Islamic State is pursuing this plot, how it's going about developing it, how it's attempting what it's putting in place to try to pull it off, talking about situations in which it might have greater impact or lesser impact, under which circumstances. In other words, if it happened in this kind of case, we could expect a big problem, many casualties possibly, or in other cases it might be more muted and not as effective. I mean, he's revealing stuff that is coming largely from this really important intelligence stream.
Now, Greg, from your reporting, did the president have any idea what he was doing? I mean, he is in a meeting with the foreign minister of Russia and, of course, Sergei Kislyak, the ambassador, who's controversial, and we have reported is believed to be not only a Russian spy, but a top Russian recruiter of spies in this country. Do you have any knowledge as to the president knowing that he was sharing this information that was so verboten?
Well, I think that, there's a couple things there. So a couple of my colleagues described this meeting with Kislyak and Lavrov as inopportune at best, right? I mean, so it's one day after he's fired the FBI director. Trump is admitting that was partly because of his frustration with the FBI's inquiry into Russia and the Trump campaign. Then he's greeting the Russian ambassador and foreign minister at the White House and having this lengthy conversation with them. And so, I mean, it's just problematic on so many levels. Other officials that we talked to, and we include this in the story as well, expressed frustration with a lack of discipline for the president. So they prepare pages of talking points, try to prepare him going into meetings like this. This is what we should discuss. This is what we need to talk about. This is what you can expect them to try to raise. Trump has insisted that those be boiled down to a single page of bullet points that he can digest, and often even strays from those.